things that would have seemed impossible for the European Union and all its component institutions and countries to agree on, we are now finding ourselves saying the same thing. Why? Because we are fighting one enemy. We are fighting the same war against the Russian invasion. The green transition today is no longer only about climate, it's also about security. We're also talking about the fact that we're triggering new, let's say, defense mechanisms, partnership facilities, unprecedented financial amounts that are going to protecting what is essentially European territory.
Is it time for an EU army?
I wouldn't look at this as a competition between the EU and NATO. You have countries in the EU that are members of NATO, countries that are neutral and therefore aren't. But there is the sense of, if we're going to talk about strategic autonomy, it's okay about equipping ourselves from a defense perspective, but also energy independence, food supply.
The EU's taken lots of dramatic steps since the start of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, but as regards energy reliance on Russia, it's looking longer term. The Ukrainians don't have time. What is the likelihood that the EU will introduce a ban on oil imports from Russia, for example?
This is a discussion that is taking place. There are massive calls for that. This is also something that is being seen also from not only from an economic perspective, but also from a political perspective, because essentially what we are doing is paying for this war. We are paying for tanks to be built and sent to murder mothers and children, pediatric hospitals being bombed. So this is definitely a discussion that is on the table. Without predicting the outcome of what will happen over the night that faces us, there are calls for immediate bans.
Ukraine says it wants more protection to be able to join NATO if it chooses, to be able to join the EU. It's asking for its membership case to be fast-tracked. This is becoming quite an emotional debate amongst EU leaders and institutions, isn't it?
It is emotional, but it's also welcome. I represent a European Parliament that immediately welcomes.
Realistically, though, membership, I mean, that's not going to happen from one day to the next.
We also need to work on what we already have with Ukraine in terms of investment agreements, trade agreements, etc., and beef them up. I would definitely say that in terms of a short-term perspective. But in the immediate, you are right. Ukrainian people want us to say yes. From the European Parliament, they got a very enthusiastic yes, and that is what I'm going to be discussing with all the European Union leaders over the course of the next few hours.
But as well as working together and fast to help Ukraine, the EU is being accused of hypocrisy. Ukrainian refugees are being taken in, offered access to education, to the labour market, but that definitely was not the case back in 2015 at the time of the migrant crisis with Syrian refugees.
I come from a country that in 2015 and even before asked for such a mechanism to be triggered because there was a pressure in terms of an irregular influx of people at the external borders of the European Union. And I remember thinking whether that could ever be possible. If these last few weeks showed us is that it is possible and that where solidarity is shown, it can be, and there is political will, it will be shown.